Glynn, Manager of Interior Design with House of Commons. So please give a warm welcome to our next panelists.
Excellent, thanks. Yeah, so real quick, if you want to know more about us, I'm sure you can stalk us on LinkedIn or meet us at the bar. But Matthew Glynn is with House of Commons in Canada. Nona, hello.
Hi.
Is with Verizon. Danielle Kennedy is a corporate coach in leadership development with Kadima. We are one of the companies that Danielle coaches and helps with the leadership development. I'm Paul Battaglia with Clark Nexsen, and I'm joined at the conference with Susan Drew, an interior designer here also with Clark Nexsen. So we've been enjoying a series of conversation amongst ourselves in preparation for coming to this event and talking to you. So we'll pick up some of the major themes that have happened in our conversation, and we'd like to invite you as well to participate, interject with comments or criticisms or experiences of your own. I'll try to keep an eye out into the crowd, but if you don't seem to be getting my attention, just yell a little louder, please. So change management, it's not just about the occupation or the design or occupation of a physical space, but it really speaks to cultural change as well. It's important that the client be organized, and it's important that the scope of change management be defined insofar as it can be. It's a very emergent and discursive process, but it's a good idea to get the client to understand the scope and the range of things that they might deal with, many of which would be cultural or behavioral or visionary or aspirational. So in terms of getting your clients kind of organized, perhaps Nona, what kind of methods or experience have you used, both to introduce the scope of change management and then also organize the client?
So I'm going to speak a little bit about my work at Siemens, as well as what I know our change managers at Verizon are involved with. I think the key is really employee engagement, to the level where the employees feel that they're part of the process. That is really the key, is to create a sense of ownership over what is about to happen. And when I talk about what's about to happen, it really does start off with the vision for the project and sharing that with the employees, and also introducing the design concepts and the design strategy and principles around, the transformation of space. And, people always feel like they're giving something up. I don't know why, because they're living in cubicles. And when you see what Verizon is now doing with our activity-based work, you'll see that it is a complete change from where we were just a few years ago. And the company, both Siemens and Verizon, do a really good job of promoting all of these projects on our intranet websites. So employees can go to the website, they can see other projects that have gone through this space transformation, and then they can begin to identify how they will be affected in the space and what role they will play in the engagement of the execution of the project, quite frankly. So I think that Verizon starts off with a town hall where there are several people involved from the global real estate group, as well as the facilities that is being redesigned. And they have a lot of designers who come in from the different firms that we're working with. There's great presentations and slideshows of the conceptual design, previous projects as well. There's a lot of focus on ergonomics and health and wellness in the space, both biophilic design as well as making sure you have proper ergonomics. And they do a really good job of creating these town halls that really fully engage all the employees.
Yeah, so that engagement, we try to, a lot of times we use the term work stream when we're doing change management, and so we'll try to get the clients to organize around certain bundles of issues, right? So food and beverage might be one, wellness and rec may be one, sustainability may be one. IT is almost always its own one. And then
health and wellness too.
Health and wellness,
It's a really
absolutely.
big deal.
So, trying to get both source the issues, but also basically empower some ambassadors who can then go back into their various departments, knowledgeable somewhat about how and why we were doing things, or at least the scope of things that we considered before we down selected to what we really had to do. And of course, there's got to be a clutch in there where you interface with senior management and the executives to get their buy-in and support. It also strikes us often that the best leadership for that isn't always the same as the people who are doing the project team. And what I mean by that is, by the time the building or the new corporate headquarters or the tenant or the TI project gets to us, someone has made a number of decisions. They may not have made all the decisions, but they've got a schedule, they've got a budget. There's probably some leasing agreement that's not allowing the schedule to flex. That team has got a job to do, and it's laser focused. These other kind of more discursive or emergent open-ended conversations probably won't suit the skill set of the same team that's been selected to execute the project. So I'm curious for you, Matthew, how do you decide? I mean, the House of Commons, I can't think of a place that may be more imbued with cultural inertia in some aspects, yes?
Absolutely, yeah. So if you can imagine, House of Commons very much steeped in tradition and culture and rich history behind it. And with that also many layers of governance, layers upon layers. And so for us it was really approaching ultimately the top layer to get the abstract direction to say, okay, this is where we generally want to go. Set your project drivers, understand your measures for success, and equally identify areas that, all right, are there areas that you want to focus on in terms of redefine, define, transform completely. We took that away and then started to build up the notion around, okay, what is this new policy, what is this new strategy going to look like for space, addressing not only the physical, but the cultural elements as well. House of Commons is very much hierarchical, as you can imagine, very class-based and very much closed culture currently. And we're looking basically to break all that down. And so we took that back, had now armed with a vision. That helped leverage the discussions we then have with the different work streams and different groups. Starting with ourselves, we did, after about 6 months of working with the House, I managed to convince everybody to do a little R&D piece. We had about 10,000 odd square feet. And when I'd first come back to Canada, I'd been away for about 10 years. I kind of forgot about cubicles. I didn't think they existed anymore because it just wasn't in the language in Europe. They just didn't think of them. So you walk back in, and much to my dismay, they were everywhere. I was introduced to this 10,000 square foot labyrinth of 8 by 10 or so and larger workstations, all in a shade, 50 shades of beige. And so we leveraged, the point of this vision session. So let's look at what can we do to ourselves first. And we're a floor of architects, designers, facilities, and project managers. No shortage of opinions in that room, and really engaging with the people early on at the early stages and starting to work out how can we really change this space. Once the R&D piece, it was a huge success. It's been a year and a half since we've transformed, leveling in different areas of kind of sensors and touch points in terms of surveys to gather some data to make sure what we're doing in terms of direction is really is going the right path. And we're now launching basically a pilot piece. And then, again, engaging at the top level with management first to say, okay, this is the overall crux of it. Let's start drilling down then and start engaging with every layer of the group. And so with HR, it was 170 odd people or more. We had open group sessions. We had about 7 or 8 of them across the group. There's seven or eight sessions that we covered everything. Started off with introducing the vision, where are we going, why do we have to change? And then also introducing topics of what's in it for them. Because a lot of people, it's the biggest question you're going to ask, what's in it for me? Why are we doing this? And so being able to leverage that as well and saying, well, here's why we're doing it. Here's what we're giving to you. In return, you're losing a bit of the I space, but you're gaining so much more in terms of we space, flexibility. And so then touching in at multiple levels of people to get different elements on feeding into pieces of design, elements of culture itself in terms of what is the policies around how do we use this space. That was a big piece for us to look at. So it's quite a big challenge, but equally take it apart in bite-sized chunks and approaching the right levels of people at the right time to keep that momentum, keep them engaged, and keep them interested in what's happening. This was a key piece.
Yeah, because a lot of times, the organization has got a lot of really enthusiastic, talented people who would love a chance to affect the project, but you have to harness and focus that energy, right? So a marketing, a communications department can be brilliant at getting information out into or sourcing information from the organization. But how you keep them kind of focused so that enthusiasm is headed in the right direction is key. And Danielle, I was going to ask you, in terms of integration, right? I mean, these are lofty things: aspiration, culture. A lot of times, those of us who are involved in all the meetings, we've had the discussion, we've had the argument, we've decided the path forward, and even when we do well enough to sit down and think about how it is we articulate that, we'll leave alone whether it's convincing or not. But first, we're just trying to say it out loud. We're hoping it's convincing, but we're talking to people who do not have the same background. So between just kind of raw education and integration, what do you find or how an organization deals with that?
Yeah, it's interesting that is probably the biggest piece that I see when I work with organizations around changing anything. I mean, this can be a small rollout from an initiative to a huge shifting up every ounce of space that you've got in the environment. And what I find consistently is that often, and I'll say top leadership, but it depends on what the project team looks like, have spent months, sometimes years, thinking, working on something, wrestling with what the right answer is, challenging themselves, asking those hard questions, trying it out, pondering it, thinking it for days, weeks, months on end before they actually come to a conclusion. And then they get to that result and they're super excited about it. And then they go and they take it out to the organization and they say, this is what we're doing. This is what's in it for you. This is what you're gonna get. And they're thrilled and they share it because they think it's a value add. And they're met with not the same level of energy and excitement. And then what tends to happen is people feel really deflated. And instead of feeling excited about the fact that they're giving the organization this incredible gift of whatever it might be, whether it be software, whether it be space, whether it be any type of work in that essence, they're met with that resistance and it kind of puts a damper on that project. And what I have found is that people often forget that when they've spent all of that time wrestling with the initiative, when they've spent that time thinking it through, when they've spent that time challenging themselves and each other, they then do not give that same type of flexibility to the people who they expect to actually activate on that plan. And so as we consider rolling these things out, as we consider taking this out to more than just the internal team behind closed doors, whether that is physically closed doors or in an open workspace, we've got to remember the people we're sharing it with, they haven't heard it before. They haven't had time to ask the questions. They haven't had time to think about it. They haven't had time to apply it. And so us giving them that freedom to say, I know you're unaware. Let me share this with you. What questions do you have? And Matthew actually pointed out a really good point. The first thing any person ever thinks about when change is put on the table is, how is this going to impact me? I don't care who you are. I don't care how unselfish you live your life. The fact of the matter is, the first thought you think of is, how does this impact me? And until we answer those questions, people don't have the capacity to really soak in everything else about it. So if we can proactively think about what are their fears around it going to be, we're going to be putting them in a better situation if we can communicate that up front. I was working with a team who was rolling out a really large structure change, and I sat with the CEO before we rolled this out to the organization, and I shared with him, the first thing people are going to think about is, do I still have a job? It's the first thing people are going to go through. Do I still have a job? And I said, the first thing you need to communicate is, we are reorganizing and not one role is being lost. This is the first thing you need to say. Then he got up on stage and he got the microphone in his hand in front of his entire company, and it was not the first thing he said. And you watched everyone in the audience, this entire company who loved the work that they were doing, sit there frozen with fear and not hear about all the positive impact this is going to have on them. What they heard is, we're reorganizing and I don't know what my tomorrow looks like. And so in terms of giving people flexibility to ask the questions, giving people the opportunity to have that fear because it's real, and answering those questions honestly and transparently, even if the answer is, we don't know and we're working on it, is going to really help as you roll out these initiatives.
And you know, I can think, we've had some clever success with rolling out, you know, smaller issues, right? Like, you know, a podcast on how to use a task chair that the vendor helps do, and communications helps deliver that video and people can watch it. You know, those are great, and you know, the people that are in it are the rock star of the department for a while. but we unfortunately get to still relearn this idea of not everyone is up to the same speed in terms of the core issues, and that's just a really hard thing. The issue of what are people afraid of, that's a great pulse survey. And just get it out there where everybody can see it. You know, what are you afraid of about this project? What do you think the risk of this project is? Some organizations cannot bring themselves to ask that kind of a question, but I think it's a sign of health, and it's a lot easier to deal with the things that you know and people have said out loud than it is the things that are left unsaid that are kind of simmering out there.
Well, and to echo that point, whether or not people are saying it, whether or not people are putting it on a sticky note on a wall as they walk by and sharing, whether or not it's being vocalized as a large group, it's still there. And what do we prefer? Do we prefer to just operate with the unknown, or do we prefer to operate with that type of transparency? And we all do it, but we know that the transparency is what gets us that better outcome every single time.
Absolutely. I think somebody had mentioned earlier, one of the presentations, survey fatigue, and people just not seeing anything from them. And that's one of the main points that we've driven. We've got about 3 or 4 surveys on the different projects we run. We try and keep them short and sweet, but there's still 10 or so questions. But it's getting those results out quickly, analyzing the detail, and being open and honest about it, being transparent, saying, this is what you guys said, and here's how we're going to try and address some of these points. And there's some bits that just can't come off the table. I think we can't do anything about these. Here's what the problems are, but being transparent, like you said.
Yeah, that was an important point earlier, because as we heard what you said, that confirms whether you're actually listening or not, right? And whether you're hearing what they're actually saying. And then maybe the answer is no, or not right now. But that's better than no answer.
And I also think that there is a lot of strength in having a project ambassador from each of the different business units that show up to maybe a quarterly construction meeting with the construction team or with the project team, where they can take ideas back to their group, talk about them, disseminate them, and bring back concerns or wins or everything positive and negative. And this way there is complete transparency and complete collaboration. I mean, if we're talking about building innovative collaboration space, you got to start there. It's like a no-brainer. You want to make sure that as we're enhancing the workplace experience for guests, that you're also getting their feedback and paying attention to that as well. And it could be minor, or it could be something major.
Talking about that, the slide was just about the post-event survey, so post-conference survey. So it's important as we get feedback and we see it implemented. If we know that we're all providing feedback and we know people are sharing it, and then the next conference, nothing about that changes without any communication as to why, people start shrugging and they're like, well, why do I bother filling that out every time? It's not worth it.
Agreed.
Absolutely.
Did anyone want to jump in or add or comment? Okay, I just wanted to check for that. So another big issue is executive buy-in, right? Because a lot of times the same people that write the business plan or help craft the aspirations sometimes have a kind of but that's for them, not us mentality. So, migrating from offices to open workstations and having the occupation of a smaller enclosed area be more about purpose than prestige, for instance, and things like that. But we also recognize that modeling the behavior that we're looking to attract or looking to change is amazingly important, right? You see your CFO sitting there with a tablet, checking LinkedIn or whatever. That's a very strong message that it's okay to sit there. If that's being introduced, maybe not so much for the Uber guys, but if that's being introduced into the workspace for the first time, who's brave enough to go sit there first, and what's going to happen to them when they do?
I'll actually add a layer to that. So I think it's really important for us to be comfortable modeling that behavior and finding opportunities, even if they're forced opportunities, to get ourselves in those spaces and to get the executives there in those spaces. But I also think that there's a huge discrepancy between modeling that and also the language we use around it. And so I think about some of these more casual workspaces, and what I often hear in some older, in more traditional environments that are trying out some of these newer spaces is you get the more traditional folk in the office saying things like, oh, I saw you were hanging out over on the couch, or oh, I saw that you took a long lunch and we're sitting with your buddy over in the cafe, right? And the language that we use is going to be really important in either advocating people continue or helping to reinforce the behavior we're not looking for. And if we can say it's not hanging out on the couch and it's not taking a long lunch with a buddy, and we can start adding some language in there that's valuable, we're giving people permission, because people will continue to behave the way that they are rewarded to behave. And when we reward people, they will continue exhibiting that behavior. And if we're rewarding them for not sitting in that new space, if we're rewarding them for sitting at their desk, if we're rewarding them, and that can be a pat on the back, it can be a thumbs up, it can be a positive comment about what they're doing, or it can be negative reinforcement in terms of hanging out or extended lunch, whatever it might be. We're giving people indications on what we expect of them. And I say we, and I mean the people who have any type of positional power, any type of influence within the organization that are responsible for helping to roll that out. And that is something I think people forget to be really conscious and really intentional about. That language makes a world of difference.
So it'd be pretty irresponsible for us to squawk on about engaging people and listening to what they have to say and their interests without having a quick pulse check. So for what we just talked about, for whom is that a relevant issue? Some? Okay. And then most of the rest of you, you've got soft seating and Bluetooth, and we're just behind the times.
Well, and I will say, there's a good chance that some environments, maybe the soft seating isn't what is a language issue, but where are we doing that? Where are we creating a barrier to someone using, whether it be technology or space, where are we creating a barrier to people behaving in a way that we are saying culturally we want, but we are pushing back against them in terms of action? And how do we get more alignment in that? Because that is where that cultural transition happens.
So given that change management involves a lot of visioning, in some cases, we're trying to introduce people to that very idea. So in the early sessions of change management, we try to introduce concepts like culture, structure, and language. So what kind of behavior are you looking for? How are you structured? What language do you use? Because those are all tremendously impactful and important things. And it's going to be important with the change management, again, to involve some element of the design team. But more than likely, we're going to need human resources there. We're going to need IT there. We're going to need the people who impact the culture of the place and can affect that. We may need to change a policy in the employee manual, or provide different kinds of equipment to people from the IT side in order to really demonstrate that we're trying to do what we're talking, the aspiration which we're trying to get to. What kind of...
Absolutely. I mean, we've got... Oh, sorry, go on. Yeah.
I was going to say that I think those work streams that you mentioned are key to any successful execution of a project. And being able to identify what falls under IT, for example, is really key, because these are the folks that are selecting the monitor arms, they're selecting the M-Connects, they're selecting the Bluetooth, they're selecting the monitors and your laptop and your tablet, everything. And to give people an idea of why, sometimes it's cost, sometimes it's technology, it could be a million different reasons. It eliminates all those questions, like, oh, how come I don't have a tablet and they have a tablet, or blah, blah, blah. It's still about me, right? And, affecting that kind of change and improving technology, which is a huge, huge leap for many, many companies, is really important. On the same terms, HR, I know, is very interested in health and wellness, and they're going to stand on their soapbox and they're going to say ergonomics and, vision and exercise and get up and stand and, let's have height adjustable desks and all of that. And that's really, really important too. So I think identifying what each of those work streams is focusing on, bring that to the employees to discuss and share and give their opinion. I think that's really important, and it's full throttle engagement, which I think is great.
Definitely. And we've looked at dealing that with our group. You can imagine, government group, lots of different divisions, and everybody has a little task, and pulling together basically a design community and saying, right, you may deal with IT, but we want you in on this decision. We want HR in, finance, you're in. We had basically a whole little community group that we'd sit down and say, okay, let's look at desks. Height adjustable, we started defining what the platform is. But then we started looking at even the end users, particularly around the stigma of you're sitting in the soft seating area. Ooh, you're not working, are you? We started to introduce, all right, when we get to these people, we've done a survey, we understand who they are and what kind of functions they need to support the work they do. We present them some ideas and say, here's some pieces that we think might work. Let's let you guys see what they are. And we had a little mock-up suite set up, and our own floor was a kind of a testing center, and said, come around, have a look, and see what works for you guys. And we can start planning this space around you. And equally, working not only with the end user, but also working with IT, saying, how can we integrate tech into these spaces? Because that is the hugest component. If you're going to give them spaces to work, if you can't leverage the technology to use them, they're going to be a flop from full stop.
Let alone at work, right? But then if you crow on about a remote work policy or a work from home policy, but then there's not a way to support it, that's a big problem. I appreciated on the Uber tour, well, first of all, the tour, but second of all, the conversation around how those different environments, you have several varieties of offices, right? You have the engineering office, but then you also have a sales office, and the technology is not deployed exactly the same way in all those different offices, nor are the amenity spaces and things like that. So programming is important. We also saw the M. Moser, is Nick here? The M. Moser spot. If you want to remember what it was like later in the movie when Pinocchio had no strings anymore, M. Moser's office in New York is like that. It's all Wi-Fi, it's battery packs to drive the laptops. So no power, no data, no strings, and all the furniture is on casters, so it can move around like crazy, which I think is a level of integration many of us talk about, but we actually saw it achieved, which was striking.
We're doing that.
Yeah, you're doing that as well.
So we have a couple of Lighthouse projects, we call them, at Verizon that are in development now, and we're talking about complete wireless environments. Yeah, it's going to be cool.
And 5G, right? We're going to see bars in our eyes soon.
Sky's the limit. We've got a lot planned, and we plan on rolling it all out in our future projects. Yeah, it's really cool. Cool stuff.
I'll back up to one of the things that Paul said just a moment ago around implementing a policy, and I hope you don't mind. I'm gonna also say it doesn't always work, right? I mean, we can write policy upon policy. We can increase our employee handbooks to be, as heavy as can be. And at the end of the day, the goal isn't that we have the policy written. Who cares? The goal is that we have people doing it. And I think what we often forget about is there's a huge difference between compliance and commitment. People comply when they're being watched. People comply when they feel like there's going to be a punishment on the other end. People commit when they believe. People commit when they see the outcome. People commit when they want to be part of something bigger. And it's really about us trying to figure out, as we're walking through these change processes, it's really about trying to figure out, how do we get people committed to what it is that we're doing? How do we help them? So Matthew and I were talking earlier about some of the changes that he's making and some of the resistance that he runs into, which is expected and should be expected. But so how, instead of saying, well, it doesn't matter if you're resisting, you have to, how do we, instead of saying that, how do we help them figure out a way to be more committed? And it takes effort, and it takes time, and it takes people being really dedicated to that, either individual or team or that effort. But at the end of the day, it doesn't mean we have to sit there and hold people accountable to it anymore. It means that we get to let them loose, and we get to see them do it because they get it.
I think you bring up an excellent point, and I think it really starts from leadership.
Yeah, definitely.
If you have the right leadership, and it could, of course, it should be your CEO or your managing board, president, and then it trickles
Or all
down.
of
or
those.
all of them, but also us as leaders of certain business units as well. It's like, you have to have that commitment and that vision of what the future will look like. Verizon's going through a transformation now, where we're restructuring many of our businesses internally and renaming things and so forth, and you're going to hear a lot about that in the news in the next few months. And it comes from our new CEO, who's at the CES show. He's doing the keynote speech at the CES show, and he's out talking to people, and he's really very public. And he's talking about Verizon and how we're moving to a technology company rather than just a wireless company. I mean, that's still our core business, and we're 100% committed to that. But, the future it's really exciting, because we're seeing all these things with mixed reality and AI and augmented reality and artificial intelligence and blah, 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 blah. I mean, we're doing all of that, and we're bringing all of that into our workplace as well. But I have to say, and Lucia is going to talk about this later tomorrow, you know, when you talk about change, we're also taking people out of traditional office spaces where we're no longer renewing leases, and we're putting them in flexible office environments that are managed and curated by external companies, third-party companies. So that's adds a whole nother element of change and managing that change, you know, because now you're coming out of a Verizon space and you're going into a WeWork space and you're like, whoa, this is different. And that, you know, that's tough. That's also very challenging, but Lucia will talk about that tomorrow.
So do we want to touch a little bit just on, and I don't know what time it is, but on some of the resistance that change is met with and how we've overcome, or the things that we've done to actually navigate through that type of challenge? Because I think that is, seeing some head nods, so I think that is something, you know, we can talk about change and what the beauty of it is, but I think at the end of the day, the reality of it is with any change, we run into some really big obstacles, and those people or those pieces that are obstacles can be really what makes or breaks it from being successful. And I think it's fun when we can kind of share the horror stories of what we've run into and how we've either fallen on our face and failed, or how we've really overcome those.
So this will have to be anonymous, but yeah, during a pilot, you know,
There is a camera on you, so.
Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah, hey.
Careful.
No, during a pilot, you know, we had someone who was asked to move out of their private office into an open workstation and try that out, and for that particular person, it didn't go very well. And so, you know, they announced they were retreating back to their office, and it's really important to go find that person and find out what happened. A lot of it often has to do with the fact that pilots are imperfect. I mean, it's impossible to truly manufacture the entire synthetic experience, right? So in this case, it was really about lacking an immediately adjacent room into which they could, you know, have coaching sessions and things like that they really needed to do. But going to find out what it is so that you can tell them, you know, there is a plan to deal with that. You can explain to them. Or maybe it was something that you hadn't thought of that's even more valuable, because now you caught it on the scale of an individual instead of a department or a floor or an office. And even just, again, even if the answer is, well, that's part of the new way, at least it's been addressed. At least that person there's been a conversation.
Well, and I hear two things in that, Paul. So the first thing that I think of is that in rolling out change like that, we shouldn't wait until they make a drastic move in order to solicit the feedback that we need in order to help them feel more comfortable. The fact is that change is hard. And so in that specific situation, I'd say, who can we deploy to have them, you know, sitting down with that person for 5 minutes every other day, or what, you know, depending on the length of everything, and saying, hey, what's working? What are you feeling like you're missing? What are you struggling with? And then I think the second piece is really about being able to, like we've talked about, incorporate that feedback in a way that makes sense. And what I hear, if let's say they wanted a private space right next door and they don't feel like they have that now, and we're like, oh, well, that's the way it is now. It's not just about saying that's the way it is. It's about how do we then train them? How do we then give them the skill set in order to do what they need to do to be successful? And how do we help them be successful in that new reality? Because most of the people out there, they want to do a good job. They're not there to ruin it. They're not there to destroy it. They're trying so hard to do their work well, and they don't have the skill set necessarily to jump into that new environment. So how do we support that?
Absolutely. And the things we were talking about earlier, the pilot project that we're working on right now with our specific group, the champion on that side for the C-level, as you'd call it, is absolutely fantastic. He is standing up saying, I don't want an office, I want to be out, I want to be open, I want to be mobile, and seeing how that affects the rest of his group. The whole organization is behind him. Another project we're working on, I don't want to get into too many details, is not like that. It's very much the opposite, and he's kicking and screaming. I don't really want to. He won't necessarily say that outright, but you can see from his language when he's in meetings, he's come to a couple of the same sessions. In fact, we were repeating the same process with the different group. And you can just tell he's not as present, he's not in the room, he's not engaged with what's going on, and it's having a ripple effect through the rest of the department. Seeing from his extended management all the way down to the bottom, and even hearing things in the lift as you're going up, they don't know who I am, and you hear little whispers like, oh, I heard we're getting this open plan, and you're like, oh, Jesus, here we go. And it's missed the mark, whereas the first group that we've had, they're absolutely thrilled in the same kind of conversations in lifts, or I hear them in cafeterias. They're ecstatic. It hasn't even happened yet, and they're so excited. We've got another 2 or 3 months left of construction before they move in, and they're already on board. So we've got a few tips as well, just to go through in terms of bringing that top level back into the fold. Admittedly, there was a few decisions that didn't go his way in terms of real estate, but we're looking to try and see how can we re-engage with that guy, and equally go through showing him examples of modeling other behavior and saying, well, here's a couple other people. Originally bringing him to some other spaces and saying, here's another department operates exactly the same as you, but private sector. Let's have a look. Let's see how they perform. These guys are completely open, the same model that we kind of embody, but we're not quite there yet. See, it's not as scary as you might think.
The concept is called bright spots. And so by being able to find somebody who they see a lot of familiarity with, who they see themselves in, and being able to show them exhibiting whatever the desired behavior is, and giving them a chance to ask the questions, or say, well, how do you do, or how do you function around, or what happens when, and giving them a chance to see someone that they see themselves in being successful exhibiting that behavior gives a whole new perspective to that resisting individual. But what we typically do is we sit them down, and whoever's rolling out the initiative, we just try to hammer in why it's valuable. And at the end of the day, they're resisting it for a reason. And so how do we help alleviate some of those fears, some of those concerns?
So we're out of time. We'd started with the idea that this is a conversation, just an episode of a conversation we've been having, and we're likely to continue to be having. So thanks for each of you for your points of view, and thanks to Kevin and Kevin's group for the occasion to continue the conversation, and we look forward to continuing it with each of you. Thank you.